Well, I got my antique tractor running, and after it warmed up, it started to smoke. I'm thinking, oh no, are the rings bad? What's going on here? So I did a troubleshoot on the tractor, and I figured out what was going on, and it turned out to be a lot easier than I thought, and it wasn't that big of a problem. So I'll show you what I did. Here we go. We're in the process of trying to put this tractor back together, TO35. Here's the front end. It's been sitting for a while, but we're hoping to get this thing running. Looks like it's in pretty good shape, the body. No dents or anything. Oh, it's even got the Ferguson decal on there. Looks pretty good. Take a look at the other half here. There's the engine. I try to put that engine all back together and stick everything back together and see if we can't get it to run. Okay, there's a lot going on inside of an engine. And we'll be looking for clues. I noticed the tractor is burning just a little bit of oil, so I want to start doing some diagnostics. The first thing we're going to be doing is the compression test. So I got this compression tester from Amazon, and I really like it because it has a different size fittings for different size spark plugs. We have to use the larger one for the tractor, and you got to screw this in hand tight or finger tight. You're not supposed to get it any tighter. You're not really supposed to put a wrench on it, so you can't get your fingers in there. So I just use the deep well socket so I can grab the socket and spin it with my fingers. Of course, the next thing you do is you stick your gauge on there. Once you got your gauge set up, now you want to do the compression test. So get out a piece of paper and pencil and make a little chart and write everything down. We're going to be looking at each and every cylinder. Now, whenever you do a test on one cylinder, make sure you have the spark plugs inserted and tightened down in all of the other cylinders. We're looking for clues. You won't get proper clues if you don't have those spark plugs in the rest of the cylinders. So the first test is write down each cylinder compression. It's called the dry test. You test all 4 cylinders and write it down. Then you go back and test all 4 cylinders again. But before you test the cylinder, squirt a little bit of oil, 3 or 4 squirts of oil is all you need, in each one of the cylinders, and then test it again and write down all of your readings. And once you've got those written down, now that gives you some kind of an indication as to what is going on inside of the engine. Okay, we found low compression in number 2 cylinder. We have a compression tester, but we don't have a leak down tester. So we're going to use this compression tester and convert it over to a leak down tester. And it's real simple to do because, lo and behold, your fitting that fits into your tools for your air compressor happens to be the same size threads as the end of this hose. So you just use your adapter, you screw this into it, and you hook up your air hose to this fitting. And that's all you have to do. Now, in order to do a leak down test in a cylinder, both the intake valve and the exhaust valve has to be closed. So in the next video, I'll explain an easy way to determine that the intake and exhaust valve is in fact closed. Okay, in order to do a leak down test on cylinder number 2, which is where we're having a problem with low compression, we need to determine that the valves are closed. Both the intake and exhaust valves are closed. We know that those valves are closed during the power stroke or the compression stroke. So I stuck my thumb in the hole where the spark plug goes, cranked the engine by hand very slowly, and I could not determine the compression stroke on number 2. There's not enough compression. So how do I figure out when these valves are closed? Like I say, they're closed during the power stroke or the compression stroke. So during this power stroke, the very next cylinder to fire in the firing order is number 1. So if number 1 is in the compression stroke, then number 2 has to be in the power stroke, thus the valves will be closed. So in order to determine this, I have to stick my thumb in the number 1 spark plug hole, hand crank it very slowly, and as soon as it pops on my thumb and I get that pressure, then I know that number 1 is in the compression stroke, and I also know that number 2 is in the power stroke. Therefore, the number 2 intake and exhaust valves are closed. Okay, in the last video we talked about how to determine that both the exhaust and intake valves were closed on the number 2 cylinder so that we could do a leak down test. In this video we'll just get into a little bit more detail of how to determine the position of the valves. Now we'll start off with number 1 cylinder being in the power stroke. In a 4-cylinder 4-cycle engine, both of piston number 1 and number 4 are coming up and down together. Piston number 2 and 3, the inside pistons, are coming up and down together. So that helps us to determine where these valves are. So let's say, for instance, number 1 is in its power stroke. The piston is on its way down. Also, number 4 would be on its way down, and number 2 and 3 would be on their way up. Okay? This one's in its power stroke. The next piston to fire would have to be in its compression stroke. Only makes sense. It's getting ready to fire. Number 3 is on its way up, and number 2 is on its way up. Let's take a look at the firing order. The firing order is 1, 3, 4, 2. So the next piston to fire is number 3. Okay, number 3 is on its way up. It has to be in its compression stroke. If number 3 is in its compression stroke, then number 2 is also on its way up. It has to be in the exhaust stroke. Number 4 is on its way down. It has to be in its intake stroke. Let's take a look at one more scenario. Number 2 in the power stroke. Number 3 is on its way down. Number 1 and 4 are on their way up. Okay, what's the next piston to fire? Let's look at the firing order. 1, 3, 4, 2, 1, 3, 4, 2. Okay, the next piston to fire is number 1. Okay, it's on its way up. This has to be the compression stroke. Compression stroke means that both valves are closed. Intake and exhaust valve are both closed. Power stroke, same thing. Intake and exhaust valves have to be closed. This piston is coming down at the same time this piston is coming down, so this has to be on the intake stroke. Since it's on the intake stroke, the intake valve has to be open. Number 4 is on the exhaust stroke because this piston is on its way up. The exhaust valve has to be open. Now you can determine the position of your valves using this method. Okay, up to the point now with the tractor, you got the electronic ignition on and rebuilt the carburetor. Had the tractor running and wanted to make sure that I had it fine-tuned. But whenever I would warm up the tractor so that I could fine-tune it, after the tractor was warmed up, it would start to smoke. So I decided to go ahead and do a compression test. I checked all these three cylinders turned out fine, but this number 2 cylinder had very low compression. It was like 7.5 pounds. I knew that was not enough compression for that cylinder to fire. So I did a leak down test to try to figure out why it had low compression. I put about 10 pounds of pressure on number 2 cylinder, and I had air coming out of the carburetor. So I knew that the intake valve was the problem. So I looked at the valves through the spark plug holes, and I could see the valves coming up and down on all the cylinders except for number 2. There was only one valve coming up and down. That was the exhaust valve. So I looked inside with a camera, and I saw that the number 2 intake valve was stuck partially open. It was mostly closed, but just barely partially open, and it would not move. So I knew since that valve was not moving, there had to be something mechanically wrong in the rocker arm or the push rod, or maybe a spring was broke or something. So I took the valve cover off, and when I took the valve cover off, I noticed that this push rod for the number 2 intake valve was bent over, all the way over here. So I took the rocker arm assembly off, and I took this push rod and straightened it out in the vise, stuck it back in, and put the rocker arm back on. But in the meantime, I freed up this valve by putting a block of wood on it and hitting it with a hammer, up and down, just to free it up. Once I got that freed up and got everything all back together, the push rod back together, then I did another compression test. And lo and behold, I got about 85 pounds of pressure on this once I got all of that fixed and got the push rod fixed. So I think that's solved the problem, and the next video will probably see the tractor running. So I wanted to make a little video on taking the rocker arm off of this engine. One thing you really got to be careful about is these lift rods. When you pull this rocker arm off, these lift rods can kind of fall down in there a little bit further. They have to sit in a seat. Now, I got this little camera from, cost like 15 bucks. I got it on Amazon, but you can look them up. You plug them into your cell phone, and you got, this is only 1/4 inch wide, so you can stick it in a spark plug hole, stick it anywhere. I use it for a flashlight a lot of times. I just take this little camera light and I'll shine down in here. But you want to shine down in here and make sure that each one of these lift rods is seated properly. Put the light right on this side, and then you can see down in there, because it has to sit into a little seat. And you'll see it when you look down in there. Make sure all those lift rods are seated properly when you sit this thing back on there. Another thing you got to watch out about is right on the top, when you pull this off, there's like a little washer on top of this. That washer can come off. So you pull them off real easy and put them right back on. But make sure that they're seated down in there when you put this thing back together, and that you don't lose these little washers. Because you don't want anything falling down in here. Then you're in big trouble. You have to take the hood off, the head off probably. So anyhow, I thought I'd give you a little heads up on that. Okay, we got the rocker arm back on, got it tightened down. All of the valves are moving freely up and down. Got good compression on number 2 cylinder. So the next thing to check is the clearance on the lift rods. So I've got this is pointed toward the number 3 cylinder, where the number 3 cylinder fires. So these lift rods on a number 3 cylinder should be all the way down, because these springs should be expanded, allowing both of these valves to come up and be closed, both the intake and exhaust valve on number 3. So we want to make sure that these rods will spin in here by hand, and there's not a whole lot of slop. It's okay if it just has a tiny bit of slop in it, but you want these to be free. You got to hand crank it around so that this moves to the next cylinder that fires. Should be 1, 3, 4. So hand crank it around till this is pointing to the number 4 cylinder, and do the same thing on number 4. And you have to do this on all the cylinders and make sure that these lift rods are free whenever the valves are all the way closed.